G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and so far you've had, well, at least a better week than I have had over the past week. As you'll know, a week ago from today I had my head cut open, skull then ground through, I'm guessing, or drilled through, and some work done on the tumour in my brain. Now I'm going to try and make a video for you today, but I am still swollen inside of my head. You get swelling after any surgery, but normally your skin would just expand, but when it's swelling inside of your skull, there's nowhere to go, so it starts pressuring on other bits of your brain which are important to thinking. So I am pretty foggy, but I'm not foggy enough to think that Vuhledar wasn't strategically important, or that things are currently going well, or that Ukraine is winning the attritional battle at the moment. So maybe neurologically I'm still there a bit more than some other bloggers that are around. Now I just want to make a video and I want to talk to you guys. Firstly, I just want to thank you guys all for the massive support. Now this, normally the cut on my head, that takes a week or two to recover. The bit of skull that they've done, that takes a bit longer, 7 or 8 weeks. But then the swelling in my brain, that can take months to several months. But I start chemo before that, so I don't really know. But I can't strain myself at the moment. So if this video just ends abruptly, I apologise. But I just want to thank you guys for all the support. I apologise that I haven't been as reliable as I've hoped to be in these videos, or as you guys deserve. You know, you guys deserve the best possible. And it's sort of out of my control a bit, or me being a bit of a pussy, but thank you guys so much. Now I'm going to try and reduce my editing as much as I can. So I'm just going to try and do this in one take. So if I lose myself or train of thought at some point, I apologise, just bear with me. I'm struggling to hold even a conversation at the moment, but we're going to talk about Ukraine. We're going to look at the maps. I want to talk about Kursk. I want to talk about North Koreans. And I want to talk about the US elections. Now, the first thing, I haven't looked at this for a week, basically, which has actually been pretty nice. It's been a bit nice just not to stare at the same things going wrong or happening in slow motion, that at the other end have people dying horribly. Just taking a bit of a time off has been very nice. But there's been some very large changes on the maps over the past week. Like very large shifts and changes in very important areas, and some changes in the US which could have huge effect here. So look, we're going to go over all of this. I hope it makes sense. Just bear with me. I've been struggling to get up and out of this chair rather than try and make a video about this. Now, North Koreans. Now, weeks ago we had bloggers, months ago even, we've had bloggers and reporters, whatever you want to call them, propagandists, saying that North Koreans are already being killed and that they were already defecting. Now we're hearing that they're 50 kilometres from Kursk. So it's one or the other. What actually is it? But again, we're going to talk about Kursk, but I believe that this has opened up the opportunity for Russia to do this. Russia and North Korea have been building a stronger bond, and they've got these defensive alliance. Now, if you forget about the occupation of parts of Ukraine, Ukraine did do an invasion into Kursk in Russia. Can Ukraine do this at this opportunity in the war? Absolutely. They have every right to do that. They have every right to have done that, like Russia has done to them. Was it tactically or strategically the correct decision? I believe no. I think it's opened up a lot of weaknesses. I think it's jeopardised other areas of the front, and I believe the maps show this. But one thing this has also done is then it has made Russia, they can go, well, we're going to defend ourselves, and then bring in, or potentially bring in, things like North Koreans. We saw Russia declare this a terrorist operation at the time, so they could bring in units from the FSB or from policing to do this also. And this is similar-ish, but maybe the opposite, to US weapons being allowed to be used within Ukraine's borders in defence, but not allowed to be used outside of Ukraine's borders. And I believe this is how the US, but somewhat opposite, may see the North Koreans being used, is if they're used in Kursk, on a part that you're occupying of Russia, that's not going to have the same effect as if they're used in occupied territories. Now, even if these troops are used in occupied territories, I don't think it's enough that it will change tides of the war massively, or I don't think it's going to be enough to then deploy NATO. But if it's used in Kursk especially, it's definitely not going to have that effect. And I believe that Kursk potentially is the largest military mistake we've seen in the 21st century, potentially. And we're going to talk about that. And I also want to talk about Harris and Trump. Now, at the moment, from everything that I look at, from the betting websites to the polls, if you can believe them, no one's ever asked me a poll. I don't know anyone else who's ever been asked a bloody poll. A poll, as far as I'm aware, is about as reliable as bloody year sixes on Facebook when it was like for a rate. But there's a few things here. Trump actually at least gives the Ukrainian leaders a way out and a shift of the blame. If we would have won this war, but Trump came in. I think the problem with Harris, Kamala, is she's already in power. Are things going to change in this war massively? Is she about to deploy 1 million soldiers? Is she about to give $50 billion, $100 billion more? No, it's going to go on the same trajectory of which it's been going under Biden, Harris currently. And that trajectory, well, that's not good for how Ukraine is going at the moment. And we'll look at the maps in a second and we'll talk about that. And I believe that, well, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing and expect different results. And this could actually be a problem in the future, a decade on, if depending how this election goes, we could say the worst thing was Harris getting in or the best thing was Trump. It could be the exact opposite. I'm not here to swing your vote with your heart. But if you're voting based on one thing or another that is a superfluous issue, if you're voting because I don't like that person or that person's colour of the skin, I'm sorry, but you're an idiot if that's the way you vote based on that, not on policy or any international relations issues. But Trump is leading in the polls and is winning the social media battle, the war on social media. And I believe this isn't that Trump's winning it, it's that Kamala is losing it. Kamala refused to go on things like Rogan, which Trump's episode has like 40-something million views. He's been on all these other massive podcasts. And I think that a Trump victory is very likely. Now, Russia has been having exponential gains. So let's show you this right here. So this is for October, but this is running this year. You can see that it hasn't been linear. And this is what a lot of people do. A lot of people's mistake they do is thinking that war is linear. They go, well, if it's 100 square kilometres a month, it's going to take 50 years before the Russians reach X. War is not linear. Life is not linear. And as you can see here, this is exponential. That only in June, July, it was 100, but now it's 400. Now, to be honest, this is probably a fair bit more than this because Deep State, we know, has ties with the Ukrainian Ministry of Defence, and we know they ignore a shitload of gains. But, as you can see here, even by their map, it's the largest month so far of this war, and I believe the largest month in about 2 and a bit years. So where I'm going with this is, I think it's likely we're going to see a Trump victory. From what I'm seeing on social media, I can't see any other way of it going, just the amount of views on podcasts and whatever else. But with Russia's exponential gains, if Trump looks to have a negotiated end to this settlement, I can't see that Putin and his senior command, his senior leadership, is going to settle for any less, absolutely any less, than Crimea, Kherson, Zap, Donetsk, Luhansk, all of which we know Russia is occupying the vast majority of, some 99%, some 100%. Luhansk is potentially 100%, we're not really sure, but the others are 70% around that. Then they'll withdraw out of Kharkiv. Now you'll talk, Kherson. Kherson might be 400 to 600 square kilometres. Russia occupies somewhere around 105 to 110,000 square kilometres. Even at a 3 to 1 square kilometre take back, it's irrelevant. But I can't see it any less than that. And that is going to be a hell of a loss for Ukraine and a hell of a loss for the West. So I don't know diplomatically, politically, how that is going to be solved if there is an end to the war, because what I'm showing you is that Russia is exponentially increasing ground. They are winning this war, both territory and attritionally, and it's looking like industrially as well, with the amount of shells and recruitment of the men, and that goes into attritionally, that they would settle for any less than those oblasts. So I don't know. And the thing is, if Trump does go, well, we're going to rearm Ukraine because Russia's not stopping, his own party and his own supporters are going to go, well, you lied to us. You said exactly that you wouldn't keep supporting this. So that is what's, I guess, to see in the coming 5, 6, 10 days. But again, I don't know, but the US is going to have a lot to do here. What my fear is though, that if Harris gets in and there is no major shift, are we just going to see next month 600 square kilometres, then 1,000 square kilometres, and then the deal gets worse and worse? Or may it get better and better, and those that are saying that Russia's out of missiles, BMPs and tanks, that start to come to fruition and that border start collapsing? But I don't know, because it's looking like the exact opposite of this. And I want to talk about a couple of things before we have a look at the maps. And I want to talk about Kursk. So Ukrainian forces never intended to seize the Kursk nuclear power plant. This is what Zelensky has said, that Moscow has repeatedly accused Kyiv of planning or to attack the plant since the start of the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk. Ukraine has flatly denied this, although Ukraine has never given a true, this is what we were going for. And Zelensky said, Russia thinks they are strong, but if we wanted to seize their nuclear power plant, we would have done it. We could have done it, but we never wanted to do it because we understand that it would mean becoming the same as Russia. We are not occupying their critical infrastructure. Now, I do doubt whether Ukraine could have done that. The power plant is tens and tens of kilometres into Kursk. It's a hell of a long way. And we saw after the first week or two that Kursk offensive take large losses and really run out of steam. But I was told of Ukrainian sources that the goal was the power plant. But if the goal wasn't the power plant, if he's saying here, we never wanted to do that, what then was the goal in this direction? Because it doesn't seem clear what then the goal actually would be here. Now, if Ukraine did occupy the power plant or did an attack on the power plant, I have said that this would be a PR nightmare unless it could have been sold as a false flag event in which they claim Russia attacked their own power plant. Then it could have been positive for Ukraine, but they're saying it's not the goal. But what was the goal? And what I've spoken about this before, and this is exactly what I've spoken about in Kursk. Even if large attacks are successful, they'll result in significant casualties for meaningless territorial gains. The territorial gains in Kursk not only, I believe, have been meaningless, but they have jeopardised other areas of very important gains around Vuhledar, Seladov, Vishnevy, places which have fallen in the past few weeks. In attritional war, which this is, any terrain that does not have a vital industrial centre is irrelevant. So terrain that doesn't have a vital industrial centre. So if it's not the power plant, if it's not the coal mines in Pokrovsk, Seladov, Avdiivka, Vuhledar, it is irrelevant. So if you weren't going for the power plant, there's no other industrial sector in there, it's irrelevant. What was the goal? The goal of this exchange fund of maybe a few hundred, maybe 1,000 square kilometres and some POWs, it's not enough to turn tides, and I don't believe it's worth jeopardising the east and the south as we have seen. It's better to retreat and preserve forces regardless of the political consequences. All it does is you lose experienced soldiers. We saw this with Germany using optics to try and capture a city just bearing Stalin's name. Of course, Stalingrad. And this is, like I've spoken about recently, it seems there's this obsession with optics, with how did this look? And if you look back at the articles about Kursk, it's so embarrassing to Putin. This is embarrassing. Oh, how could this happen? Okay, that's a political consequence, I guess. That has blown over now, just like the embarrassment of some of the other large failed attacks Russia has had. Once that embarrassment is gone, what has been jeopardised somewhere else? And like I've said from day one, I never understood Kursk. It seemed like an easy place to get a few thousand square kilometres, 1,000 square kilometres and a few dozen positive headlines, but at what cost in other areas, purely for PR. And we have said that propaganda needs to support military actions. Military actions aren't done to support propaganda. So you launch a military action and your propaganda, your informational war needs to support that. You can't launch a military action that is the propaganda in itself. Anyway, let's continue talking about then the North Koreans. The North Korean troops may join the Russian military at this frontline area soon, as confirmed by NATO and the Pentagon. So we have seen that America, NATO, they've said that there are North Korean troops within Russia. Have we seen them fighting yet? No, there's no evidence of this. I don't care what the bloggers say online about they're already walking off the front line or that missiles are hitting them or whatever. I don't give a shit about that. I care about actual evidence. I actually care about the truth. So we haven't seen that yet. Will they join in the Kursk region? I think possibly. I think it's highly likely. Will this then have a huge effect on NATO or American policy? I don't believe so, especially if it is in Kursk. Especially that. It'd be like if we deployed troops, we by NATO, if we deployed troops into Ukraine and they were operating within Ukrainian borders, that would be seen by the international community, and the international community is not the EU and NATO. That is a very small percentage of the population of the world and a very small percentage of countries. By the international community, the UN, that would be seen as vastly different than if Western troops deployed into Russia. And we know this is true because of the policy around Western weapons being used in occupied territories and Ukrainian borders opposed to borders of the Russian Federation. We know that's different. We've already said that that is different. And I believe the flip side of this is, sorry, I get a blood nose all the time. The flip side of this is if North Korean troops are used in defence of Kursk, it's going to be seen by the international community. It's not just NATO, it's not just Estonia and Lithuania, countries with no actual international power. They're sitting under, they're sitting behind the dog on the leash that is the US, and they're sitting under that nuclear umbrella talking shit about deployments. It's going to be seen differently than a deployment into occupied territories. And even if it was a deployment into occupied territories, again, it's just going to be significantly, I think it's going to be tried to be overblown in an attempt to draw in NATO forces. And I don't think that this is anywhere near enough to see this. Now, we've spoken that Ukraine desperately need men. This is being ignored by your big bloggers. This is being ignored by your Twitter pages. It's being ignored by these guys because it warrants the question, you go and sign up. That if these flag-raising accounts, these NAFO, whatever they want to call themselves, if they started saying, we need men, that is what we need desperately. We need guys to sign up. It warrants a top comment with a thumbs up going, on your horse then, buddy. Come on, you can fix this. NAFO could fix this. But we know that they're probably not going to. Well, they've had the opportunity for 2.5 years. But we have seen that on October the 29th, that 160,000 people are planned to be drafted into the Ukrainian forces. Now, the weeks of training, maybe a month of training, maybe for defensive actions, but if these guys were to do anything that is offensive actions, it's going to take a minimum of 6 to 8 months minimum, so potentially mid-next year, we may see these guys enter the battlefield. But again, we will see. So let's have a look at the map. So of course, here we have Ukraine in the centre, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 2022, the purple since 2014. The red check is area that has been made by Russia over the past 24 hours. But we are going to go back a week or so, and we're going to have a look at what is changing. There are dramatic, large shifts over a week. Sometimes it may actually be handy to zoom out a week and have a look. So we can see by this, what I'm showing you here, that this is an exponentially increasing front. And November, if November is larger again, and this trend that we're seeing, if Trump was to get into power, this is going to be used by Putin especially. Go, well, we're increasing by 20, 30%. If we extrapolate that out, we're going to take this or that. It's going to be used politically also. But let's zoom in on some areas. Now, some areas which have fallen, which is incredibly interesting over the past only week that have been off. Seladov has gone. All of Seladov today has been occupied. The last remaining area, as well as Veshnevy, and a push out, of course, near Kurakhove as well. So this whole what used to be the Avdiivka front in recent memory, which is now some marathon distance back, has really pushed through multiple lines of defence. This is a worrying trend. And let's just push back to where we were. I believe the 23rd was the last time I saw you, and you can see the ground that's made into Seladov. We spoke that the flanks were the real risk here, and through there's been significant advancement on this front. Let's look what ISW said. The rate of Russian advance in Ukraine is increased in recent weeks, but remains slow and consistent. So it has increased the rate of their advancement with positional warfare rather than rapid mechanised manoeuvre, emphasising how generally stagnant Russian advances have been over 2.5 years of war. Now I ask some questions in here. One, it is increasing, so it is not only slow and consistent, but it is increasing as well. But I believe at this point in the war, we're not going to see mechanised manoeuvre re-enter the battlefield. We're not going to see that. We're going to see this positional warfare grind down. And that is so hard to defend against rather than the cut-off of mechanised manoeuvre. I think so many forces are so focused on reintroducing manoeuvre, mechanised, some Gucci fucking tactics. Is that actually possible? And I ask, with drones in warfare now, is mechanised manoeuvre actually possible anymore at any stage in war? That if we tried to do a mechanised attack into whatever country, is that possible with the amount of ISR that drones and the targeting that drones can do? And at this point in war, I don't think that we'll see manoeuvre warfare re-enter the battle unless we see a complete degradation of air defence systems and opposing forces. But that's not manoeuvre as far as tactical manoeuvre. It will be manoeuvre because of the degraded enemy force. That if we see Russia or Ukraine reintroduce massive deep manoeuvre, it's because there's going to be no one there. Does that make sense? It's not going to be just because of some tactical fucking planning. So let's have a look at some of these fronts in here. First, I want to talk about this front in here because I believe this is probably likely closed up. And let's look at what Noel Reports says. Now, I'm not going to show you all these maps and changes. You can go and look, go and have a scroll through Suriak if you'd like, and you can look at all the footage. But we can see where Kurakhove is just in here, and Zorani and these areas that are closing up. Now, Deep State shows more in Kurakhove than Noel does say, but he does mention we can see where the Russian forces are, but there's only one way out of here. And here, I believe he even says he's not sure if any Ukrainian forces are in here. But if this does close up between Ostrivsky, where this is, this Hostre front in here that we saw close up a week ago, this is going to be a large amount of ground that is getting squeezed then through. Russia will gain a lot of ground up through and then into Kurakhove as well. So there is some large changes in here. Now I'm just going to belt feed a couple of changes in around here. Now, last time we spoke, I said this with Suriak. The Seladov might fall before November, which today we have seen. Now let's just have a look at how this then occurred by Suriak map. So this is Seladov here, and you can see we spoke that the flanks were the most dangerous part for Seladov. And as this moves up, the map might move up and down, but regardless, it doesn't matter. Go over number one. Oh, sorry, that was number one. And then you can see the flanks, the moving out of Ukrainian forces, the Russian spearhead in the middle, and then we can see on Pokrovsk front, Seladov, more pushing up through these areas. And then when we get to the last map here, we can see how Russia has exploited the gains out past these fronts to create this buffer as well. This red dot is this Novod whatever down in here, Novod Mitrivka, and saying they're reaching the centre of this locality. So exploiting, pushing past this, past Vishneva, and this is what you need to do when you're advancing. Is you need to not only gain the area, you need to exploit and push past. And the next area that's going to be absolutely in the sights is Pokrovsk. We know a lot of forces were held up in Seladov, now Pokrovsk, and that has fallen very quickly. But I think we could also see with this natural waterway here, this whole front close up here, what is going to then put pressure down south between Vuhledar and Kurakhove. Remember, Vuhledar was not strategically important. We need to talk about Kurakhove front in here too. We can see further how the Russians have exploited the flanks again and have started enveloping and taking these areas, and today that the majority may have come then under further control. Now, the other area where I believe it's even larger is Vuhledar front. And this looks completely different to when I showed you this last week. So let's go back to the 23rd. Look at this. If we jump to today, 23rd, today, this is significantly different. So if we jump up to today, so let's go this point right here. Okay, let's measure from the 23rd to this point here. We're talking some 11 kilometres. 11 kilometres is behind a lot of other defensive works and positions. That is one hell of an advancement over that time. So if we jump through, get rid of this, we can have a look where the Russians, Zolotoneva, remember, it seems like a distant memory. We saw that armoured attack into there. Many said a failed attack. It's just because they've taken casualties or large casualties, that doesn't mean an attack is failed or success or whatever. If you've got the ground and you can replace those losses, that can be a successful attack regardless of the losses that have taken, as long as it isn't Pyrrhic. I see this idea that 3 vehicles, 5 vehicles have been killed in an attack. It's been failed, but the ground is still taken and then an exploitation and push past. Just having losses isn't a failed attack, which may seem backwards, but you can see this push up and this closing into this territory, and in some areas more than 10 kilometres taken. My worry on this front is the defensive works that sit between Zap and this front, and the potential of Russians getting in behind this and making the defensive works then pointless, especially if this closes up and this whole area begins to close in here. But not only this, it's like I said in the beginning, it's the optics of how this looks at the moment with X's exponential increases. If, say, Trump was to get in, look at the situation and go, well, who's holding the cards at the moment? Putin's forces, 100%. And this is Noel reports here showing this some 10-kilometre advance, and then the geolocation of the Russian flag here. And we can see these exploitation of these grounds and gains made by Suryak in these directions as well, and that sort of creating further buffer zones too. Now, we have seen this map doesn't show it. So if we just go on this and go the 23rd to here, that shows no changes around New York, Nepalivka, Toretsk front. But keeping up a little bit with what Suryak said was that there was a Ukrainian advancement in here that did push out some of the Russian forces that held areas in just to the east of New York. So in and around here. This is one of the problems. This map never showed this advancement, never even showed grey zone in here, although we had geolocation, so it can't ever show then that there was potential Russian gain in here. Now, Chasiv Yar, no changes in here, and there's only been very minor changes, if we go back from the 23rd to the 31st, in these other front lines. But you can see an increase in grey zone. Now, this is the Makiivka front that has closed up in here, between Nevsky and Makiivka. Now, we reported for about 2 weeks prior to this that Suryak did show that this area between here had been filled in, so I don't believe that is new. But there is one major change in here that is really, really worth looking at. So we see an expansion of control out around Pishani. But if we move down, we saw this Nevsky Makiivka close up, and then we see this Terny Zarichny front in here, this Torsky area. Now, we did show you the other day, Nevsky, this push down and this closing up using these natural reservoirs as borders. But this is, I believe, some of the most concerning advancements I've seen in here. So where we're talking about is this Zarachny. Let's have a look at where this road runs in here on this right angle, just to get an idea. This is where this road is right here. If we skip forward, Suryak is showing this closing up. Now, what Suryak is showing in here is that this has really closed up in here. And my question is asked is, with FABs dropping on these bridges and potentially fire control artillery, what is the fate of the forces within these areas? Will there have to be a withdrawal, or could we see a real squeeze on the Ukrainian forces in this front, as they're showing that this has been filled in, and they're saying, I believe this is about 3.5 kilometres back from here. Yeah, about that. So Surak is showing up to Toretsk, where the Russians are, as well as expanding control out around then the Pishani area too. Now, as far as any other major changes, not really. We do see some grains in here as well as grey zone, but as far as like what we saw in Vuhledar, Silido, Vishnevy, nowhere near as much. Now, guys, I don't know when I'm going to make another video, but look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you as soon as I can. Thank you for all the support with everything. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Bye-bye.